If you thought gender ideology was on its way out, well, let me tell you, maybe it just moved countries. Please help us reach 500 subscribers. Recently, there was an incident on the Mexico City subway where a brave police officer was disciplined for doing her job and protecting a women's only space. What happened after is an absolute injustice, and what lies beneath this case is a dangerous ideology that puts women's safety at risk, as we've seen so many times before in other countries. A few days ago, on August 12th, a video went viral on social media that left many speechless. At the Merced station on the Line 1 of the Mexico City subway, a banking and industrial police officer identified as El Lira C denied a trans person, Alexa Andrade, access to a women and children-only car designed to protect women who travel alone. In the video, the officer clearly tells her, "You are in a special area for women, and you are not a woman, you are a man." Alexa recorded the moment, questioning whether she had broken any rules, to which the officer responded by standing her ground. This video sparked a storm on social media. On the one hand, some accused the officer of discrimination and transphobia. On the other, many applauded her decision, arguing that she was protecting a space created specifically for the safety of women. The Mexico City subway and the Department of Citizen Security reacted quickly. They issued statements saying they would investigate the case and that the officer would face disciplinary action and training in gender equity. The Council to Prevent and Eliminate Discrimination, or COPRED, also condemned the act, calling it illegal. They stated in part, "Let us remember that in Mexico City, discrimination is prohibited and is an illegal act, which is why actions have been taken within the regulatory framework of this council." However, necessary and legal discrimination exists, ironically based on feminist principles. Positive discrimination, the simple fact that there exists an exclusive cabin for the safety of women and children. So it would be interesting to ask the COPRED who it values or defends more, a man dressed as a woman or real women. And sadly, more and more we have been seeing Mexican institutions value the men dressed as women more than the actual women. So really, is it illegal punishing a woman who is doing her job to protect other women? It's the last straw and another example of how law and justice has been distorted to censor and in favor of ideologies without solid foundations. According to the latest updates, the officer involved will be sanctioned. The SSC confirmed that the Department of Corporate Supervision and Evaluation of the Banking Industry of Industrial Police will impose a disciplinary punishment and will start an administrative investigation. In addition, the police officer will be required to take courses on gender equity and respect for the rights of the LGBTQ community, continuing the cultural revolution taking place in Mexico. The subway, for its part, insists that it operates under guidelines of inclusion and respect for diversity, and that any act of discrimination will be punished. And as crazy as it might sound, DEI policies and the like have installed themselves within Mexican institutions in the past few years. Opinions are divided. Many of us applauded her, and I, for one, fully support the work of the officer for protecting women. But others, who always shout and argue the loudest, those that the current government and institutions fear, celebrated the sanction, accusing the officer of course, transphobia. I am nonpartisan and do not support any politician, but it is worth mentioning that Senator Lily Tellez came to the officer's defense, calling her a hero for doing her job. But the Mexico City government seems determined to punish her, yielding to the pressure of gender ideology and distancing us ever further from common sense, biology, and the truth. This is not justice. This is a witch hunt against a woman who was only doing her duty. Let's examine why this punishment is a complete injustice. Punishing this officer is a direct attack on women's safety. The women-only subway cars exist for a reason, to protect us from harassment and violence in a transportation system where SA is a daily reality. This officer wasn't acting out of hate or prejudice. She was upholding the purpose of those subway cars to guarantee the safe space for biological women. However, the subway and the SSC, instead of supporting her, are sacrificing this police officer on the altar of political correctness. They're forcing her to take gender equality courses as if she were the problem, when the real problem is the lack of clarity in policies that should uphold and respect biology and safety. What message are they sending to women? That their safety doesn't matter if someone is offended because we don't believe their disguise? It's outrageous, and for me, it's like reliving the madness I escaped from in Canada and that the United States is finally trying to stand up against. So is the UK. In Mexico, according to the INEGI, which, well, isn't always super accurate, 96% of women have experienced some form of violence or harassment in public spaces. Exclusive subway cars are a measure to reduce that risk, especially in a country that doesn't legally allow carrying objects that could help a woman defend herself. Punishing this officer is not only unfair, but it weakens the protection of all women who use the subway, myself being one of them. And this brings us to the next point: why it's crucial to maintain these exclusive spaces for biological women. Exclusive spaces for biological women aren't a whim, they're a necessity. Biology matters. Women face specific risks due to our physical reality, and segregated spaces such as subway cars, bathrooms, prisons, or gyms and changing rooms exist for a reason. But gender ideology, which allows any man to identify as a woman and access these spaces, is endangering society. And it's not as if there aren't examples of the consequences in other countries that have already implemented gender self-identification or policies and laws that protect ideologies that lie and distort the truth. Let's give some examples. In Canada, in women's prisons, men who identify as women have been transferred to female cells. In 2023, there is the case of an Ontario prison inmate previously convicted of SA who was transferred to a women's prison after coming out as trans. The result? Harassment and assaults on inmates. In Vancouver, where I lived for 13 years, there are no longer shelters for women who have suffered violence after a man disguised as a woman caused a scandal because he was denied access to one called VRRWS. The Human Rights Tribunal ultimately forced the shelter to allow men who claim to be women into the shelter, which also resulted in even more abuse perpetrated against women who are already incredibly vulnerable. In the United States, ESPA in Los Angeles in 2021, WeSPA, there was a man who identified as a woman and entered the women-only area, exposing himself to minors and women without their consent because it made him feel good. Clients who protested were accused of transphobia, of course. And in New Jersey in 2022, a man who insisted he was a woman was transferred to a women's prison and ended up violently impregnating two female inmates. After anger and protests, he finally was transferred back to a men's prison, and this is not the only case. Several women's prisons with similar policies have had to distribute condoms to avoid similar problems instead of denying biological men access to spaces for women who are already in vulnerable situations. In the United Kingdom, also an infamous case in 2018 involved Karen White, a man who claimed to be a woman who was placed in a women's prison and viciously assaulted several inmates. Interestingly, statistics have shown that the majority of incarcerated men who demand transfer to women's prisons because they feel like women have histories of abuse against women and minors. Not surprising. And these are not isolated cases. When any man, with or without malicious intent, is allowed into women's only spaces just because he identifies as such, it opens the door to abuse. I'm not even saying that all trans people are a danger, but ignoring biology and allowing unrestricted access is a recipe for disaster. Women's safety cannot be sacrificed for fear of offending a minority. Gender ideology, which prioritizes subjective feelings over biological truths, is a danger. And while this continues to become more and more obvious in places like the United Kingdom and the United States, places like Mexico and other Latin American countries are just now starting to implement the crazy policies that other countries are now getting rid of. Protecting the mental disorders of a tiny percentage of the population, less than 1% in Mexico according to INEGI, cannot be put above the physical safety of half the population, women. lying about biology, denying physical reality, or accepting that anyone can be a woman simply by declaring it destroys the notion of absolute truths. If we lose sight of the fact that biological sex is an objective reality, we open the door to policies that endanger women and children. This isn't inclusion, this is negligence. And people should not be afraid to admit it or acknowledge it. What happened on the Mexico City subway is a clear example. Instead of supporting an officer who protected women, who was herself a woman, the government prefers to punish her so as to not upset the defenders of gender ideology. This is a betrayal of women, but worse, of logic. What happened in the subway is a wake-up call. We can't continue sacrificing the truth and feeding lies to satisfy an ideology that ignores reality. And even though in the US and partly in the UK, it seems like this ideology is on its way out, it has found refuge in the global south, and I don't think for a second it can't be rescued and reinstated once those who defend the truth get complacent. Officer Elsira Lee doesn't deserve punishment. She deserves recognition and praise for doing her job. Physical differences do matter. They do put women at risk, and it used to be obvious that women and children should be protected due to their physical disadvantages. Exclusive spaces for biological women must be defended because biology doesn't lie, and safety in the face of avoidable risk is a non-negotiable. So yes, gender ideology is all the way over here in Mexico, and don't think for a second it can't cross right back across the border and install itself into the US, the UK, Canada, and other countries who have started to tell the truth. If you got to the end of the video, please don't forget to subscribe and help us reach 500 subscribers. Thank you.